everyone, my name is Brandon Beachum. I am the catalyst and captain of Industree, and this is the Industree origin story. You know, all companies, organizations, great movements, they all have a story. Really, the universe is made of stories, and I think of stories as the most significant medium to foster authentic connection across cultures. I like to say stories turn otherwise cold data into warm destiny, and this is definitely a destiny story. It's an unusual destiny story, actually. You know, the universe shows up, life shows up in different ways for different people, and for me, it can get very loud with synchronicities, serendipities, breadcrumbs, winks from the universe, whatever you want to call them. And this is definitely one of those stories for me. Now, I understand some of you are going to hear this and chalk it up to coincidence. I totally get it. You know, I'm not really asking you to believe everything that I'm sharing in this story today. I just ask you to listen with an open mind. I think of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He said, "The mind, once stretched by a new idea, never goes back to its original dimension." So let's dive into the Industree dimension. So starting from 10 years old, I've been a serial entrepreneur. Always had on to my next big idea. And really the biggest idea that landed for me in my life to this day, the biggest ripple of impact was, my early 20s having a coming to an understanding regarding the ultimate nature of reality. And this idea that we're all one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. And that has really been just a foundational force in my life ever since those moments of realizing, like, wow, I'm connected to everything, and wow, I can create anything as a result. It's all within reach to some degree, right? And so at the time, I thought to myself, well, if I can do anything, I might as well do what I love most, which is music. And that's when I came up with the idea to start a band called Kundalini. And we were together for about 8 years. It was an incredible experience. Moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. We played with some really, artists that went on to be pretty well-known artists that some of you probably heard of. Papa Roach, Hybrid Theory, who went on to change their name to Linkin Park, Hoobastank, Alien Ant Farm, bands like this. And actually, our bass player's brother was in a very large band, No Doubt. And, I think back as one of the highlights of my Kundalini career was when Adrian, the drummer of No Doubt, came up to me at the end of one of our performances that he attended and said, "Wow, your performance, you guys blew me away, particularly you, Brandon." And so, yeah, I chalk that up as a Kundalini highlight for sure. So around this time, I had the next big idea of mine, which was an idea for a new music platform, one that would bring artists and fans together and create community in a way that really hadn't existed prior to that I knew of. And so I got very excited about launching this music platform that I wanted to call Industree. And I also, around that same time, 2005, went to my first Burning Man. And Burning Man absolutely blasted me wide open. This incredible, radical experiment in, counterculture and community, unlike anything that I'd ever seen before. And so, this idea of sharing, resources and creating community around art and music, it was all kind of percolating and coalescing. And I had this big idea, that with Industree, and I'd kept it very close to my chest because, I didn't want anyone to take my idea before I got it out there. And so around that time, I was listening frequently to a show called Coast to Coast AM. This is pre-podcasting. If you wanted to hear about metaphysics, consciousness, extraterrestrials, these sorts of concepts, which I'm fascinated with, Coast to Coast AM, back pre-podcasting days was the way to do it. And so one evening I was listening to Coast AM, and they had open lines. And someone called in. He said his name was Omar. And what really jumped out to me was when I heard Omar say, "I'm calling from the year 2063. Uh, and so, of course, my ears perk up. The host of the show is like, okay, Mr. Time Traveler, what do you got for us?
Sure.
Hi,
Omar.
I'm actually calling from the future.
How far out are you, sir?
I'm from the year 2063.
2063. What brings you back here?
Well, like I said, I'm calling from the future. I am not from the future. I'm in the future.
So what's going on in the future?
Well, I know you talk about a lot about 2012, because actually I used to listen to your show when I was younger. And what happens is there is no huge cataclysm. I mean, as you probably know, with everything going on in the world, we were approaching a level that seemed like that was likely, but the opposite happens. There's a musical artist that actually gets together with all his subordinates. He has a record label, and they all get together and pull their money together and start forming a community to try to destroy the value of money.
Who's the music artist? Is he well known to us in this time period?
Not at the exact moment that you're in, but like I said, by the year 2012. I can't reveal the name, and the reason's actually kind of subtle. He just didn't want anybody to steal his name.
Oh, yeah, that's true. If he revealed it now, some aspiring rock star would grab it.
Right, yeah, just for the sake of, But, yeah, so they form this community, and they make it self-sufficient, their own factories, their own farmlands, etc. And they start giving these things out to the outside world that, still uses money for free, and slowly the value of the dollar starts being devalued. And
again.
Right. Well, I mean, in a good way this time. There is no such thing as poor because everybody can afford everything.
Well, you know what? That, Mr. Time Traveler, is a great idea.
And so, of course, after hearing that, I just was dumbfounded. Like, hold on, this guy, here I am having my own sort of very expanded awareness and perspectives, and feeling that I'm meant to bring something really transformational to the planet by way of this new music platform. And here's a guy claiming to be a time traveler, recounting how someone who's a musician who makes a record label of sorts that then parlays that into a community and, sort of permanent village infrastructure from the sounds of it, which was all part of my big idea. And I'm listening to this and I'm just, again, dumbfounded, shell-shocked. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, this is incredible. I feel like I have this huge calling. I'm meant to make a big difference. And I don't want to be completely crazy. I don't want to lose my mind. So I remember saying to myself, taking a moment and saying, universe, if that message from this, supposed time traveler, if that message was meant for me, I want a sign. And the sign that came to mind was, he said his name was Omar. Okay, I want to see or hear the name Omar within the next 24 hours or so. Sometime in a short amount of time, right? So I remember that was a Friday night. Saturday morning, I'm driving in my car. I'm talking to my brother on the telephone, sharing with him about what I heard, on the show the night before. I stop at a stoplight. I look over, and right in front of me, Omar's print shop. And of course, I'm like, wow, there it is. Here's the very next morning. It's not a name that's prevalent in my life. I don't see or hear Omar. I don't know anyone named Omar. And so, yeah, I got my sign. I didn't end up, launching it the next day or the next week or the next month. Life was happening, and I had actually, just started a company and had my first, 20 employees or so. And I remember, this is maybe a few years later. I had 20 or so employees. I feeling kind of stuck with what I was doing. It felt stagnant. I felt like I was off mission. I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. And I remember one day deciding to go down to the courtyard during my lunch break and meditate. And I remember saying, look, a few years ago, I had this wild, Omar synchronicity happen. If I'm meant to pursue industry now, even though I don't have the resources, I don't know how I'll put it all together. But if I'm meant to take a leap of faith and do this, I want to see or hear the name Omar again. And, I spent 10 minutes or so on lunch break later that day, picked my son up from school. We're driving home. He gets a call from a friend he hasn't seen in years. The friend is, begging him to come for a visit. My son Bradley is like, Dad, can we go visit Danny? Can he come visit us? Whatever. And I'm like, no, that's a good weekend thing to happen. And this was like a Monday, I remember. And he's like, oh, please, please, please. And, he's hard to say no to. And so, okay, fine. So here I am sitting in traffic on a Monday, like, what am I doing? This kid lives 30 minutes away. We get there to pick him up. He runs out from his house. He gets in the car. First thing out of his mouth, hasn't seen my son Bradley in, over a year, 2 years, whatever it was. And first thing out of his mouth is, Bradley, I'm so excited to see you and share with you. Yesterday, my dad took me to this bird shop. It was called Omar's. Omar this, Omar that. I remember at dinner hours later, he looked at us. He said, did I tell you about Omar's yet? We're like, yeah, like 10 times. I mean, it was a very loud response to, my ask for a sign. And so I followed the sign. I did what I said I would do. I threw caution to the wind. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I somehow, my brother Ryan came in as a partner and helped to fund a first version of a site, and took a year or so to put it all together, and we launched the first version of Industree. And instantly it grew to thousands of users. It was kind of like a MySpace. This is 2009. MySpace meets Spotify before Spotify. We had our own currency called Blooms then as well. And, this is right around the time Bitcoin is launching as well. I didn't know anything about Bitcoin until years later, but we were basically acting as an exchange. You would earn Blooms on the platform, and then you could exchange them for, cash. And it grew to thousands of users. Had a little bit, started having some challenges. There was a personal tragedy in the family with my brother's girlfriend at the time, and the little bit of investment capital I had dried up. The person was supposed to put in another tranche. They decided not to. And so I was frustrated with, financial challenges. I decided I'm going to put this project aside for now. I'm going to focus on, I can create anything. I'm going to manifest the money to do this right. I don't need to get money from someone else. I don't need to raise money. And that's when I was led to launching a travel company called Resort Share. And Resort Share really became my first significant success, if you will. It went from me on a friend's couch to an Inc. fastest growing private company in the US with over 100 employees. And, it really became its own tiger by the tail experience. My plan was to use the resources to go and do Industree right. And, again, there was so much happening there with its growth and managing it, maybe 4 or 5 years into that journey. I also was feeling a strong desire to have an outlet to talk more about consciousness and the ultimate nature of reality. And I ended up launching a podcast in 2015 called Positive Head. And if you listen to episode 1, it's like I had to do this as an outlet so my poor friends and family's ears can stop bleeding hearing me talk about this stuff all incessantly. And then that became, a rocket ship of sorts. It very quickly became, a top podcast on Apple in the spirituality, consciousness-centric category, and reaching lots of people. And then I went on to create a co-living and event space in Los Angeles called the Mystic Manor, and set up a film studio there to film, go from an audio-only podcast to a late-night style full-blown production show called Optimistic. And from there, during COVID, writing a book called The Golden Key. And so here, all these years passed, and I never got back to Industree. So I was talking with a good friend, and we were reminiscing about Industree, and he was like, Brandon, you were just way ahead of yourself with the first version of Industree. You should really bring it back and look at all the changes in technology and what's happening with blockchain, and and we got talking, how would I do it and what would it look like? So that really triggered me considering, like, because up until that point I'd thought, okay, I got a lot of signs back in the day, and I never got back to Industree. Maybe it's just a different timeline. I experienced what I was meant to experience from it, and that would be it. Now I started considering, hold on, maybe this is meant to be a version 2.0. Maybe there is meant to be a redemption story here. And so I remember, I believe it was 2022, I was at Totality Festival, and I remember one day sitting at my camp, talking it over with some people, and just saying to myself, I feel like I'm meant to bring this project back, all these years later, Industree, and this music platform, and I've got some fresh ideas about how I would do it. And I was sharing a little bit about all the signs I had gotten in all the Omar, synchronicity and whatnot in the past. And I said, you know what? If I'm meant to bring it back, I'd like a sign in this moment. And within 60 seconds, a dragonfly literally landed on my nose. I don't know if his name was Omar, but he stayed there for a hot minute. And so I got up from that seat and said, okay, I'm meant to do it. That was very unusual to have that happen. And so I got up, I set out to walk around the festival, and I'm like contemplating this big life decision. It's sort of like a flashback to, okay, I'm gonna take the leap of faith. I don't know exactly how I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna start taking the steps. And here we are all these years later. I'm walking on the trail at Totality. I run into a friend named Ken. And I start telling Ken, exuberantly about, hey, I'm going to bring this platform back, and here's how it's going to look, and, just telling him the details. And he was very excited. And he was like, wow, that sounds really cool. I'd love to be a part of it any way that I can. And really, two people come to mind. He goes, well, first off, do you know that guy? And he pointed over to Nate Stein, the artist known as Equanimous. At the time, I did not know Nate Stein. However, I met him in that moment. He ended up becoming a really great friend. Now he is brave enough to be the guinea pig, the first artist token that we're releasing on Industree. And so that was like a very powerful moment of me proclaiming that I'm bringing this back, and it led to someone who is very significant to this project. And the second thing that he said to me goes, when we get back to LA after this festival, I have another friend that comes to mind. I really think you should meet. His name is Omar. And you can imagine, my jaw completely hit the floor. Like, are you kidding? Is this really happening? Yes, I will meet with Omar. We got back to LA. We sat down with this really cool, funky, older guy who had worked on the Superman movies back in the 80s. When I met him, first thing he said to me, hey, my name's Omar. I'm a bit of a time traveler. And, it was just an incredible confirmation. What can I say? It was like, okay, here we go. So from that moment forward, I started to consider what would it look like, putting plans together, slow steps. Really another year or two a couple years after that, I'm still, hosting my podcast. I have a guest on the podcast, a woman named Alunya, who claims to be a channel, who claims she can communicate with your spirit guides. And, over the years of podcasting, having, a top consciousness-centric podcast, I'm exposed to a lot of people who claim to have intuitive gifts. And quite frankly, a lot of times they're lackluster, not that impressive. Although, from time to time, you come across someone who really, blows your mind and has some piece of confirming evidence that shows they're really tapping into something. And that's exactly what happened with Alunya.
Your guides are giving this analogy that you are a bit like a one of the most delicious what is that, a berry cobbler that has been baking for a time and has been baking so much, and there's so much contained that you are overflowing.
I instantly looked at her shocked because, I'm originally from the South. And the night before, this is, Monday morning, Sunday night, the night before, my mother had decided to make me a blackberry cobbler, my favorite dessert. It's a very Southern thing. It's not the most common dish. That was the last food in my mouth. And here she is saying I'm like a delicious berry cobbler. And so that was quite the confirmation. She went on to, I then asked her, now I'm really interested in what she's going to share. And so I went on to ask her, all about Industree. And she had some very powerful things to say there.
Because they are saying this is the future. They are saying it is your future. It is where you are going to have all of your gifts come together under one hat, is actually what they're saying. And you will be able to utilize the beautiful, potent, and tremendous amount of energy that you contain and move it in one direction, which will shift the face of music, they say, forever. So this is something to be deeply aligned to.
Wow. So, hearing her she knew nothing about Industree or my ambitions around Industree. So, for her to turn around and say that it's going to be this revolutionary, project that changes the face of music forever, or however she put it, that was, after getting such a solid confirmation that she's the real deal, that was very inspiring, obviously. And, from there's been many other little Omar synchronicities from, one time I was actually on a walk soon after that with my brother, and we were talking about, how I'm going to do things and the architecture and setting it up. And I made a big decision and I felt lit up and excited. And then I came back from the walk and grabbed my phone, which I had left behind. And there's a, message from like a Partiful, invite or something from a random person named Omar, first thing on my phone when I walk in. Or I, came across at a key moment Omar written on a dollar bill one time, or walking downtown LA with a friend talking about Industree, and I look up and it's 2 a.m. and there's Omar's in front of me, and it's on and on. It's gone. It just continues to show itself at key moments in exciting ways. And I don't know if Omar will show up again. At this point, I'd be more surprised if he didn't. What I do know is Industree is destined to get another shot. Industree 2.0 is a redemption story. And after 20 years of exploring the ultimate nature of reality, what I've come to understand in the core of my being is that we are all one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. And if that's true, then the old model, build something, extract as much as you can, make a handful of people wealthy, it's fundamentally flawed. In my book, I make the point that in the context of the new world that's emerging, if you want to know the outcome of any endeavor you're embarking upon, you'll never guess it right up front. But what you can guarantee is that the intention going in will be baked into the outcome. So this is my experiment, full blown. No more endeavors focused primarily on my success. At this point in my journey, I truly believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is in giving that we receive. So what happens when the founding intention of a platform isn't to just make me rich, but to make everyone involved as successful as possible? When the structure is literally designed to be shared because we're all one anyway. That's the heart and intention of Industree. And if you're watching this, I don't think that's an accident. I'm not just inviting you along for the ride. I'm coming to work for you and with you. So I invite you to join me on this journey as we set out together to build something beautiful that the world has never seen before. What if the new music industry belonged to all of us?